Hello and welcome back to In Search of Black Power. I'm your host, Lawrence Grandpre. So 2024 seems like we can't escape it. And it brought in a wave of conversation around just what it means to engage politically. Everything from black women voted for Kamala, so we're good, we're going to brunch, to we need to reinvigorate focus on pushing the Democratic Party left. Folks like David Hogue and all the things that happened to him, getting a seat in the DNC Leadership Council and then losing that seat, to people just saying this proves electoral politics. What's the point? You know, the colloquial term of art for it, what they did to Bernie in terms of undermining his campaign is a rat fuck, if you exclude that bit of language. You can look up the book of the same title. In that world, what does it actually mean to navigate electoral politics effectively? What is the value as a revolutionary leftist and someone who has progressive politics and even engaging in elected officials? What does it mean to deliver concretely on policy issues for community? And how does the left take this moment and reevaluate some of its assumed logic around things like political education, mobilization, and how do you effectively navigate within a political system that we all agree and know is not built for revolutionary change? So this is an interview instigated by my co-host, Dayvon Love, and his extensive work as Director of Public Policy for LBS, effectively navigating the political environment here in Maryland, Baltimore, almost entirely Democratic, but still producing so many of the negative outcomes that we see. So many of the folks around us in the progressive left networks kind of critique the political process, and that's their method of engagement. But the idea of working and hammering out legislation, working on implementation of that legislation the way we do here at LBS, has been deemed something that's too icky, just something you want to think about reformist. And this is an attempt to explain more in depth the conceptual idea behind our operationalizing of our radical politics through grassroots advocacy, writing bills, directly engaging Democratic Party lawmakers, and really focusing on implementation and delivery of concrete change through the legislative process in a way that maybe challenges some of the assumptions of folks in our audience, in the podcast network that we're on, around what does effective progressive political engagement look like from a radical leftist perspective. So again, lbsbaltimore.com. Check us out for more writing on this topic and things that we work on, direct policy issues, policy reports. Of course, continue to check out all the other podcasts on the Black Liberation Media Network, the YouTube page, and the website, where they have great merchandise for a variety of podcasts. Not this podcast yet, but something that we may look into in the future. And with that, we thank you, and I will see you on the other side. We're back with another episode of In Search of Black Power. This is Lawrence Grandpre, and I'm here with my coworker, Dayvon Love. Always good to be here with you.
Yes, sir.
So we wanted to talk about third-party politics, but also just really talking about how leftists and progressives think about politics, think about the party system in this particular moment. We see a lot of folks, Democrats, saying things like, it's Green Party's fault that Trump won, blaming Jill Stein, and also saying things like, I remember that someone was giving a speech, Kamala supporter, being like, how does it feel to be right? And people saying things like, well, black women voted, other people didn't vote for Democrats, it's their fault, we as black women are going to sit this one out. And just all the discourse around that, but also a lot of leftists saying, this whole thing shows that in attempting to engage left politics electoral politics is a fool's errand. How they messed over Bernie and messed over a lot of candidates that the left supports, and just generally like this moment of concern, interest, but also some degree of fear and potentially nihilism in some cases. So just talk about this concept of, as a left progressive person, how should they think about engaging electoral politics in this particular moment?
Yeah, so one of the things that I found myself saying a lot recently is that, politics is a site of contestation for resources and power. And one of the things that I think is most needed in this time that we're in is a level of precision about people's relationship to these different sites of resistance and these different sites of struggle and of political struggle. And I think, and that precision is important because I think it helps us to be able to guide more effectively and order our steps in terms of concrete things that we can do and that we can encourage other people to do that can actually move the ball forward in a revolutionary direction. And so I start with that because I think there are ways that sometimes people just talk broadly about, speak up to support socialism or, smash capitalism. And one of the challenges that I want to put to radicals and to the left is we got to start being more precise about what are we talking about exactly? Like, what do we mean exactly? And I think that's a large part as to why the left in the United States is so weak, right? Because I think many of the most vocal proponents are folks that are not giving people precision about what are the steps, what are the things that people should be doing or engaging in towards a revolutionary direction. So in the context of the American political system, I think we got to be clear that, as I started off with, it's a site for contestation of power and resources. And it is a site of struggle that if we disengage from it entirely, we are ceding all that power to our enemies. So we have to be clear. Engaging the American political system does not mean we support America. Does not mean we believe that America is a democracy. Does not mean that we have some existential allegiance to the social order that is called the United States. Engaging the American political system is a recognition that all of us are in the system, no matter how revolutionary our rhetoric is. You go to the grocery store, if you're listening to this, you're using the internet, right? You're using telecommunications that black folks or non-Western imperialists don't control. So in terms of all the things necessary to navigate the world, our people don't control it. Revolutionary forces don't control. So all of us are in the system. So the question to radicals on the left is, what are the most effective ways for us to engage the political system, knowing that revolution will happen overnight, but also engaging the political system in such a way where we don't succumb to what I think, and it is seductive, we do not succumb to normalizing the political landscape, right? So as normal, right? Because we live in a genocidal capitalist imperialist, society. But we have to engage the political system with that in mind. But again, as I talked about earlier, do it in ways that are concrete, like do it in ways that provide people with concrete steps as to what it actually means besides just saying socialism good.
Yeah, I just remember you were at a meeting and there was someone you were on the panel with who was bragging about not engaging the state. And despite they had a job that was clearly around doing advocacy that literally engages the state. And I think there is something about the left claims to engage the state, but they're claiming to engage it on terms where they can often resist things that seem so obviously wrong. But not providing an alternative means they're not culpable for any of the messy implementation or power relations that come with building institutions.
Yeah, I mean, there's an unseriousness of some quarters of advocates and leftists about what they're actually engaged in. Like if you have a job with a national advocacy organization, that don't make you a bad person, right? Mm-hmm. But what it does mean is that you are in the system. You are engaging the state. So part of it is having an understanding of then what are the mechanisms that we're engaging. And so one of the things that for me, in terms of this conversation and thinking about how radicals should engage the American political system, one thing that's clear is that we're in a two-party system. That two-party system helps to facilitate the maintenance of the system. And so there's an understanding of that, but there's also an understanding of multiple sites of resistance, where there's some moments when it requires those that are within those systems to push from the inside, and then while simultaneously understanding the importance of building, formidable political forces outside the, Republican Democratic Party. And it's important to note, too, because I think one of the mistakes that radicals can make is thinking that merely just starting a party constitutes sufficient enough of the infrastructure development needed to create alternatives to the two-party system. And it's important for people to know the Democratic and Republican parties are major multi-billion-dollar corporations that have for generations developed infrastructure to maintain the two-party system and make it extremely difficult for forces outside of it to be viable. So for those who are like, I can't stomach engaging any of those two-party systems, I think that you're right, but that or that you're entitled to that perspective. However, given the nature of the society that we're in, it's important to note that there's utility in folks who are operating within Democratic Party formations, that there is utility in that as well. So just a couple of examples of that. One of the most popular examples at this point, Bernie Sanders, who is an independent, describes himself as a democratic socialist, caucuses with the Democratic Party, ran for president in 2016 and 2020, and was very successful given himself in an American society that demonizes very heavily, communism and socialism. He was able to be tremendously successful given that fact in the Democratic primary. He actually his campaign sued the DNC for meddling in the 2016 election. Before the primary was over, major elements of then Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton were in essence engaged in controlling some of the operations of the DNC before the primary was over. And so they sued the DNC, and I'm kind of paraphrasing what the ruling was, but in essence, the outcome of that lawsuit was that the Democratic Party had no obligation to be fair and transparent because it is a private company, it is a corporation. So the people who are part of it are not entitled to fair, open, transparent elections. To me, that's a really important thing for people to be clear about, because I think there's a way that people have this idealistic sense of thinking about these parties as if they are obligated to deliver for its people and to be transparent to those who contribute to it, when in actuality they have no actual obligation. And it's consistent with our analysis, across a variety of platforms, that, as black folks, we are captured electorate by the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party, particularly its corporate core, its consulting class, are very clear about that. And so I think that's important for people to be clear about. Another example, I use myself. And we've talked about this on this platform. We live in Baltimore City, which is a city within the state of Maryland. State of Maryland is a Democratic Party stronghold. Our legislature is a Democratic Party bastion that has a veto-proof supermajority. Baltimore is like 8 or 9 to 1 Democrat to Republican. I am a registered Democrat. I'm a registered Democrat not because I believe in the party, but because for my ballot to have any impact on the local election, the primaries are really the only things that matter, given the nature of the system, the in essence one-party rule in Baltimore City. I ran to serve on the Democratic Party State Censure Committee in the 41st Legislative District in Northwest Baltimore in order to have more influence over those who would occupy seats in the legislature. And we were politically warring with a faction within the Democratic Party establishment in the 41st District. Many Orthodox Jews who are avowed Zionist, who are conservative in their politics. They are conservative Democrats and particularly on issues of criminal and juvenile justice. And the evidence of that has been their pretty consistent criticism of former State Senator Joe Carter, who's a mentor of ours, very progressive, radical state legislature when she sat in the seat. and she was, pilloried by, conservative and right wing media, of which this force within the 41st district of Zionists helped to amplify. And they actually, in 2022, ran a slate of members. There are 8 members of the State Central Committee in each legislative district in Baltimore. They ran a slate that was entirely of Jewish folks, all of which and particularly the leader, Councilman Yitzi Scheifler, who is a Zionist, right? So I want to be clear that it is not them being Jewish that is the issue. It is that their ideology around Zionism is the unifying force behind, which is consistent with their conservative politics. And so I ran for State Central Committee. Former Senator Carter asked me to run for State Central Committee to push back against the conservative Democrats' attempt to essentially make the political representation more conservative for a district that's 62% black. And so I want a seat on the State Central Committee. Now, what's interesting is that we were able to get one person appointed who best represents our worldview and perspective, in the district. What's interesting, though, is that there's a continued fight, in the 41st district. And even though I had a seat in the Democratic State Central Committee in the 41st district, I maintained my advocacy around the importance of building forces outside the Democratic Party to push the Democratic Party forward. And I was actually put off of the State Central Committee as a result of that, right? That there were anxieties about my public pronouncements about the fact that black people are a captured electorate, the importance in building political forces outside the Democratic Party to push the Democratic Party. And that was in large measure a rationale for me being put off of the State Central Committee. So I'm giving these examples in terms of, like, it's important for people to be clear, again, that it's important to struggle within the structures of the Democratic Party while also building forces and formations outside of the Democratic Party to push the Democratic Party as left as possible. And I will say a part of why that's important is that there are real material gains that we have been able to get, as a result of the ability to push the Democratic Party to the left. So I just wanted to front load with that like the Democratic Republican Party are corporations, and the energy and resources and time it's going to take to build forces outside those two, the duopoly, require a lot of work, which means that there is work to be done within those structures as well.
Yeah, so just to briefly recap that, because I think it sets up the next question. It's a multi-billion-dollar corporation, but unlike most corporations, we do have a mechanism of control over it, which is our vote. Mm-hmm. So you went within the party infrastructure, and in the face of the possibility of this all-white slate being elected in a majority black district, got enough votes and support to get someone actually appointed by the State Central Committee to the state legislature. Mm-hmm. Despite knowing the depths of, being clear-eyed what the Democratic Party is. Mm-hmm. And you use the term often, navigating the political spectrum, and you offer that as one example. Mm-hmm. But can you talk more about how you conceptualize that term mm-hmm. and ways you feel like maybe the left's black-white thinking may obscure the possibility of that being a useful concept, mm-hmm. and what you mean when you use that term?
Yeah. So we are clear that there's a global system of white supremacist, imperialist, colonialist power. There's a global system of white supremacy, and that it is responsible for the miseries of billions of people around the world, and that the ultimate North Star is a world where, people of African descent, other folks, other world majority people, have the ability to practice the sovereignty needed for them to deliver on the life-preserving institutions needed for people to live a decent quality of life. Like, that is a North Star. That is a tremendous societal transformation that is necessary. And I'm real clear that that is the goal. There is no substitute for that. I'm also clear that that's not likely to happen in my lifetime. So I'm very clear that there are steps that need to be taken in order to get ourselves to a place where that actually comes to fruition. What I also know is that given the current political reality and given the nature of the socialization and conditioning of many people within the system, that there are a lot of people who are engaging the system, and it's often described as them being pragmatic. People are engaging the system essentially based off of what immediate material needs can people glean. Like, what are some, some people will decide, I want to run for office because in my neighborhood, there are no playgrounds. I want to make sure there's playgrounds for kids to be able to play. Now, in the larger spectrum of politics, that don't necessarily push us towards the kind of revolutionary social transformation that I've described. But if you're thinking about like people in time and space who do not necessarily have revolutionary understanding of the way that the society operates, for a person who is just living in time and space, more playgrounds for the kids is a good thing. So I'm clear. So a part of it is we have to assess in the context that we operate in. We have to assess what are the things that are possible immediately, what are things that are possible in a more intermediate timeline, and what are long term. We have to make those objective, clear-eyed assessments. And so what we've done, like in terms of our work here at LBS and like our legislative work, one of the major things, for instance, that we worked on is stopping the practice of automatically charging youth as adults. So the 33 charges of a young person's charged are automatically put in the adult system. And if a kid is in the adult system, they're not entitled to mental health services or education. In many respects, they're supposed to be sighted sound away from adults. So what ends up happening is functionally solitary confinement. And there are kids who spend sometimes almost 100 days, 120 days in the adult prison facility where it's completely dehumanizing. 80% of those kids are black kids. What's even more crazy about it is that about 75 to 80% of the young people charged as adults end up getting way back down to the juvenile system anyway. And so in last year, there were 529 young people who were charged as adults, spent time in the adult system, who were way back down. So kids who, according to this system, needlessly were in the adult system for however long, that's dehumanizing. Against 80% of those kids are black kids. Now, what I just described is an effort that from a racial justice perspective, just generally is good, right? It is something that will be helpful to alleviate the material conditions of black people who this society deems as disposable. Now, in the grand scheme of things, that is something that should be easy. Like in the grand scheme of things, that in and of itself does not make revolutionary change. But what I know is that being able to deliver on that policy will help the communities that we hold ourselves accountable to, will deliver materially to those communities, right, that we hold ourselves accountable to, and can push the conversation around the way that our community is dehumanized by the criminal juvenile justice system. It helps us push back against that system that pushes us towards more revolutionary political conversations, discourses, and political activities. One of the things that happens sometimes, and this is the tricky part of doing the work that we do. One of the things that happens is that people who are able to be effective in the political landscape with a policy like the one I just described, which has been a policy that's been on the table for almost 15 years at this point, and will make that the pinnacle in terms of what our politics delivers. What I'm clear about is it is certainly important for that policy to pass. I'm also clear, and that there are legislators that support it. State Senator Will Smith, who's chair of the Judicial Proceedings Committee in the Maryland State Legislature, who's a Montgomery County Democrat, a black man, who is not a radical, who is not a revolutionary, right? At best, a between liberal or progressive Democrat at best. He was someone who supported a version of the policy that I just described. I'm clear that that's good for him to support that. I can simultaneously also be clear he's not a revolutionary, and be clear that moving that policy doesn't make him a revolutionary, and it doesn't make the legislature revolutionary, and it doesn't change the critiques we have of the Democratic Party. So to your question in terms of navigating the political spectrum, one of the things that radicals in the left need to do better at is be able to engage the existing political landscape, be able to navigate it in a way that can deliver concretely for the communities we hold ourselves accountable to, while also not being sucked into seeing the accomplishment of some of these policies as something that in and of itself is revolutionary, because what that would do is then it would pull our political spectrum to the right. So we're always clear that revolution is the goal, but we have to be able to navigate the existing political landscape in a way that can ultimately empty in to more revolutionary purposes. And again, I think for a lot of people, that's just a tough tightrope. I remember talking to a brother that I greatly respect, and he said to me, he was like, yeah, I don't want to engage any Democrats. I just want to push them all off a cliff. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, that's a legitimate feeling to have. It doesn't help in terms of navigating the political landscape in a way that can be effective. And I would argue that our ability to be able to advance more revolutionary political activity comes as a result of us navigating this landscape, people seeing the results of what we've been able to deliver, and it has made people more willing than to support even more revolutionary political activity.
So that's interesting, because I think that is contrary to what a lot of people fear. What people fear is delivering on those reforms, so they are good, increases people's connection to the belief in existing systems, Democratic Party, and that the alternative is mass radical consciousness raising. That really having a clear community education component that challenges the fundamental reality of the Democratic Party as a corporation could yield potentially results down the line, like you talked about with things like the auto charging, but would do it in a way that would open up those more radical possibilities more clearly in people's minds, and also help them with their anxieties about engaging the existing elected officials from the perspective of working with them, but more just straight pushing them and educating people about the ways they failed, and having that be the center of our political engagement. So folks are presenting this political education as essentially their version of navigating the political spectrum. So what do you say about that argument in terms of its efficacy and the ability to produce more revolutionary possibilities?
Yeah, and one thing I got to preface what I'm about to say with is that I have very strong feelings about this. And what I mean by that is, I remember when we were a lot younger, and there's some folks who at this point are elders that we used to observe in the community who carried kind of radical politics in terms of their rhetoric and perspective. And I noticed that they were inconsequential in the political landscape, and they would talk about how they spent 25, 30, 40 years doing what they were doing, and they were relatively not a consequential force in the political landscape. And I remember thinking to myself that I didn't want to be one of those people that, 60, 65, 70 years old wouldn't have been able to say, this is the way we've been able to impact our community. And so I start with that because one of the things that I think the left has to begin to embrace is that politics is a combat sport. It is not, and there's a way that people will say things like not appealing to people's morality, right? Like leftists will say, we got to build power. But I think what people aren't clear about is like, this is actual war. And a part of how you measure the utility of what you offer is what have you been able to do? And so part of my strong feelings about this is that those who call themselves radicals, I think we have to begin to measure the value of our work to our community based off of what are we actually capable of doing? What is the track record we have in successfully challenging systems of power and building alternatives? And so I think the question around consciousness raising and the focus on political education is something that I think has created a context where people, that what they consider political work is in essence ideological proselytizing, right? Going to different people and saying, you got to be Marxist-Leninist, right? You got to be Pan-Africanist. And there's a way that kind of ideological proselytizing trades off with the work that it takes, for instance, to build a political party, or the work it takes to build an institution that can solve, people's food needs, or, or a range of things. And so even when I think sometimes about people that are offering political education, and there are some baseline things that I think people can offer, understanding of history. What are some things that have been done in the past? What are some general knowledge about, the global dynamics of finance capital and all those things. But again, for me, what often is missing is like, what is it that you have been able to do as an individual, as an organization, to put into practice what you're training people on in terms of political education? And again, one of the things that I'm most proud of is that we can identify concrete wins that we have been able to bring into fruition that have real material impacts on the community. So this isn't to say that people should not do political education. And as people who are familiar with us, we read, we talk about big political revolutionary ideas. Those things are important. I just think there's so much, particularly the online left, there's so much focus on political education and consciousness raising. And see, here's part of the other challenge with that. Part of the challenge with that too is the assumption is that if everybody just thought the same way ideologically, that would be enough to bring forth revolution. And what is important for people to understand, it is that it is the how. This goes back to what I said at the top about precision. It is the how that is not simple to figure out. Like, just because a person has been immersed in revolutionary political theory and history doesn't mean they would understand how to build political power in Indiana, right? Or how to build independent food systems in South Carolina, right? Like, those are things that require, you got to figure stuff out that Marx hasn't written about, right? Like, you apply some of those things that are useful in answering some real concrete questions. And this goes back to what I was saying when people say, we need to advocate for socialism. Like, to me, that doesn't mean anything. Like, what does mean something is advocating and building a food distribution system that feeds everybody. That's concrete. Or another concrete thing that I think, is something that people are doing a lot of, like Medicare for all, right? Okay, that is a concrete policy, right, that would undermine profit maximization as a part of the healthcare system in the United States, that will undermine an industry that has an interest in people being sick. So a part of what I'm getting at is that now there's the question of how to make it happen. So there's the policy, but there's also like, how do you make it happen? So all of that to say that political education and consciousness raising, if overdone, it is my sense that it actually can become harmful. Because the more conversations people are having around political education and consciousness raising, and that's the center of the conversation and discourse, it trades off with the how. It trades off with, how do we support Rashid Aziz and Citywide Youth Development and the Image Center to build a worker co-op where young people in the community are making apparel, manufacturing it in West Baltimore, so because to me, that fights capitalism, right? So now that undermines transnational corporations that are using substandard and really dehumanizing labor standards in third world countries to mass produce to get us cheap stuff. If we're able to produce manufacturing locally that the community owns, collectively, that employs the community to manufacture on apparel, see, to me, that fights capitalism. You know what I'm saying? In a concrete way. And so that, to me, it is those concrete conversations of how to do it. That's what gets left on the table when the focus on political education and conscience raising sucks up so much of the energy and discourse on the left.
Yeah, I remember a conversation about supporting the effort you talked about, and someone saying they went to a leftist group and they said they could only buy T-shirts if they were fair trade and union made.
Mm.
Right. And sort of, I think that's an example of what
Mm.
it actually takes to implement these policies, where it's like not just a food refrigerator, but something that can work at scale. Right.
Mm.
So these sort of things can be good, mutual aid. And the left has been very adamant about those things. So when it comes to like, if you're going to have a pot of money, who appoints the people who actually allocate the money? What's the timetable on the dispersal of the funds? Who holds the funds? You know, what can the funds be used for? Who's doing the accounting to make sure the funds are used, and actually having good answers to all of those questions. So just kind of fleshing out more about when you say the how, it's things like that, like those specific details, and negotiating with constituencies that may have disparate desires, and how do you actually navigate that concretely without calling people sellouts and capitalists and blowing up your ability to actually effectively engage with people.
And one thing I'll add to that too, because there's a thing that people do where it's like we have to work with people who have a perspective, have a positive perspective on capitalism, for instance. We have to work with people who that's their belief. To me, the best way to persuade them that socialism is better is to do things that lead us in that direction. So again, using the Image Center example, the brother Rashid Aziz, because many of the people who supported him and his ability to build his center in West Baltimore are certainly not revolutionaries or socialists. I'm clear that his vision is for it to be worker owned and for it to be something that provides jobs and opportunities to the community. It's not useful to occupy a position where it's like, oh, you're a capitalist, I can't work with you. And so I think that's one of the things that I wanted to add to that as well, which is that what will persuade people that we're correct is supporting efforts of which the vision empties into a revolutionary socialist vision, right? So let those other folks who have that conservative perspective, let them have that perspective. What will bring them to our side is our ability to deliver on some of those more concrete things.
So to kind of conclude, we've talked about this a couple of times in terms of when you have leverage and the Democratic Party sees consequences for not delivering, that can actually push them to deliver in real concrete ways. So 2026 is an election year coming up in Maryland. We also have some past experiences in Maryland where we feel that the Democratic Party maybe didn't deliver for black folks and then felt they had to make up for it in some ways. So can you talk more about what this political leverage looks like in practice and some empirical examples, and kind of project that into the future about what could we do 26 wise, what we've been talking about with LBS doing, and what that might mean for other leftist people's visions about how to actually get leverage on the Democrats with third parties or alternative formations to actually deliver concretely, like you've been talking about.
Yeah. So, one of the things that we've been able to observe in Maryland, there's some ways that some of the theories that I think some people might ascribe to us as like theoretical, we've been able to observe in real time. So in 2014, the Democratic nominee for governor was Anthony Brown, who's currently the Attorney General. He was lieutenant governor under Martin O'Malley. And most people thought it was a foregone conclusion that he was going to be the next governor. His opponent was a little-known businessman, Larry Hogan. Larry Hogan wins, and it's a surprise upset. Because there are a lot of people, for a variety of reasons, that were just dissatisfied with the Martin O'Malley machine and dissatisfied with the Democratic Party. So, and I don't know if Lawrence, if you were in the office with us that day, it was after, sometime after.
I know what you're talking about, and I was.
Yep. So it was sometime after Anthony Brown lost, and the Democratic Party was so shocked. A operative from the Democratic Party came to our office to have a conversation with us about like what are some of the things the Democratic Party should do to win over more folks like us. And if I'm remembering correctly, I remember two of the things that I said that if they did, we could have further conversations. The first thing I said was around community oversight and control of law enforcement. If the Democratic Party explicitly put as its platform community oversight of law enforcement, we can keep talking. And I think I said something like a commitment to advancing procurement in terms of black businesses doing getting money for contracts from the state and making it explicit part of the Democratic Party's platform. I said, you do those two things, we can keep talking. He didn't come back, right? And I knew that. Those were things I put on the table knowing that the Democratic Party was never going to do that. What then happened subsequently is there are a whole slew of policies that folks have been pushing for many years that became viable when there was a Republican governor as opposed to when there was a Democratic governor. Because remember, even though Hogan won, there's still a supermajority in our legislature of Democrats, a veto-proof majority in the legislature. But they wanted the governor's mansion back. So I remember one of the first things that happened, there was a bill, I got to give some credit. I remember Doc Cheatham, who used to run the Baltimore branch of NAACP, and many others, who were put in a bill that would allow for people who had felonies on their records, allow them to vote upon release. And that bill, that effort had failed several times. Hogan becomes governor. That bill gets put in. It passes the legislature. Larry Hogan vetoes the bill. The legislature overrides the veto. Now, some people may say, well, look at the Democratic Party in Maryland embracing returning citizens and their voting rights. What I'm clear about, and I remember being at a meeting of Democratic Party operatives where they had identified there were 40,000 people who were likely Democrat voters that couldn't vote because they had felony records, which was more or enough that it would have helped them, in the 2014 general election, or at least would have been helpful. So anyway, my point with that is very clear that it wasn't the Democrats' commitment to returning citizens and the black folks. It was they understood it as politically expedient for them to deliver on that kind of a policy. And then there's a series of things that the Democrats started pushing on, and many of the efforts that we had worked on. So whether, for instance, whether there was repeal of the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights, the Child Interrogation Protection Act, Juvenile Justice Reform Act, a wide range of policies that the governor vetoed that would not have been possible, in my view, if there was a Democratic governor. And so for me, it's an example of what happens when the Democrats lose. They have to put more energy in trying to appeal to a base, in this context, black folks, who they see as an important part of their pathway to electoral victory. And so that's one. So for me, I remember in observing that, it's like, okay, this ain't just theoretical, right? This is actually something that happens in terms of leverage. So then fast forward a little bit, because we, in terms of third parties. So one of the things that often happens that I think radicals on the left don't do well is they don't explain to people what is the material benefit of voting for a candidate that is not likely to win that race. So if a person is running for, the Green Party or Party for Socialism and Liberation or any other emerging parties, they're likely not going to win. Any of the races that they're in, they're likely not going to win. And one of the conversations that, again, doesn't happen enough is to explain to people, well, what is the benefit of voting for them if they're not going to win? One of the things that we feel like happened in Baltimore, in 2016, there were a variety of younger, more progressive people who ran for city council. And among some of these people, there were some Green Party candidates. There was a brother who ran for Green Party for mayor, a brother named Joshua Harris, Andreas Spiliadis, he ran for a city council seat in the 3rd Councilman District as a Green. And there are a variety of other people who run in for office in the Green Party. We knew they weren't going to win any of those seats. What happened, though, was that there was a significant enough numbers of people who voted for the Green Party candidate. So even like in the mayor's race in 2016, I think Josh got like 10% of the vote. Right? That's pretty substantial, right? In a city that is a Democratic Party stronghold. And so it is our sense that the combination of those electoral endeavors, Green Party candidates on the ballot, and larger progressive and radical forces created a context where we now have a more progressive city council as a result of advocating for pushing the Democratic Party as far left as it can go. And so that push is what made a bunch of things that we worked on possible, right? I mean, one of the things we've talked about is like the Baltimore City Children and Youth Fund, right? Taking 3% of property tax dollars. That's, 12, 13, $14 million a year that go to primarily Black-led grassroots organizations to serve children and youth. And that's community-based. Like, that ability to do that was made possible by a city council that was more progressive than the previous one. Because it would have been much harder to move that through the city council if we had a city council that was conservative like the one that preceded the one in 2016. Or in the work that we did in terms of reparations for the war on drugs and establishing the Reparations Commission, a couple of years ago. Again, that wouldn't have been possible with a more conservative city council. So these are concrete ways that voting for people who did not win, because and let me just talk about the mechanics of that. Because what then happens is when people run for office, they're looking at the data at who voted for what. So they're looking at all these people that voted for a Green Party candidate, and what that means is that then folks who run for office who are Democrats are going to have platforms to try to capture some of those votes, right? So that's actually the mechanics. So that's the mechanics of how that actually works, which again is not something that I think leftists and radicals do enough explaining in terms of how that impact works. So now when someone is running for office, those are things that they're able to see concretely impacts their platform. And so then looking at 2026, one of the things that we want to do in Maryland is actively work with the Green Party, and the potential Green Party nominee for governor of Maryland, Andy Ellis, which, full transparency, somebody we've known for a very long time. He's someone in terms of politically has engaged like Black radical movement, tradition, scholarship, etc. And so we're in conversations with Andy about, what it means to actively work to push the polity in Maryland further left and use it as an opportunity to explain to our community, again, to further explain the material benefits of voting for a person who likely won't win. Andy will not win. Andy will not be governor of the state of Maryland. But there are important material impacts that can be had both by having him on the stage. Like one of the bills that we're going to put in the legislature, in the state legislature, will require the Maryland Broadcast Commission, when it does a debate in the general, that all the candidates that have a ballot line, like all the parties that have a ballot line, that their candidates be represented on stage, which would give, for instance, Andy an opportunity to challenge, the current governor Westmore on immigration, on reparations, on criminal justice, which again is helpful in pushing the party further in the direction that we want to go. So those are the things that for us, we want to use it as an opportunity, both here and maybe even nationally, to show people like this is how you build political formations, political parties outside the two-party system, while also acknowledging having to work within it. As I mentioned at the very top of this podcast, I think both of us are registered Democrats. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? I explained earlier why that is, right? So again, explaining the importance of what it looks like to both build those political forces outside the two-party system, the impact that it can have in terms of movement policy, while also understanding that there's value in navigating within the systems to push it as far as it can go.
So a few takeaways I wanted to leave you with before we close out from that conversation with LPS Director of Public Policy Dayvon Love and myself around navigating the political spectrum, the role of electoral politics and leftist progressive movements. So first is political education. It reminds me of a quote from Marimba Ani, formerly Donna Richards, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and then changes her name to Marimba Ani, someone with grassroots organizing experience who ends up being this academic that writes this amazing 700-page book around Eurocentric versus African-centered thought called Yurugu. She juxtaposes rhetorical ethics, which she sees as a Eurocentric system that espouses ethical precepts but doesn't always follow them through, with existential ethics, which is the need to tie the word to the deed in African-centered theories of ethics. And I think that the political education risks becoming attempting to adopt, in many ways, meaningfully meaning and trying to do positive change, but adopt a Eurocentric tool for an African-centered job. So if the idea is we're going to talk to our people and educate them in the abstract and talk rhetorically about how this approach to politics is better, African people may be looking for more existential meat on the bone, more proof about how the political system will deliver materially for them. And so as an African-centered pedagogical tool, part of what we do in terms of engaging in trying to deliver materially for folks is a method of political education, something we mention in the conversation, we want to flesh out a bit more. Secondly, I think that just to continue with the conversation about the example we gave, there's this center on North Avenue, which is a historically neglected part of, it spans the whole city, but the particular center we're talking about is in West Baltimore. And when we talk about getting money for them to do manufacturing of clothing, one thing that we say is like, some of the people supporting them may be capitalists, but if they're getting money from the city, that otherwise, and that's the critical thing, otherwise is going to India, to sweatshops, or is going to large printing entities in Howard County, which is a more affluent, multicultural, but largely white county. What is the investment of public money in doing, like, Baltimore City needs clothing. All the people that work for the city have shirts for their department. There's shirts for summer programs. There's school uniforms that need to be printed. What is getting money that our tax dollars collect from big corporations and rich people, distributing it to the people that work at that place? What is that other than a form of concrete material economic redistribution that a socialist should be in favor of? But because of the conceptual notions of, we know this abstract notion of worker cooperatives, fair trade, organic cotton, those were literally the responses we've gotten. We went to people about why they weren't going to prioritize supporting buying clothing from this shop. And I think that while all those concerns are valid and important, what we miss is the political base you could build if that shop has the contract to do things like, there's a violence prevention program in the city called Safe Streets. They print out hundreds of shirts saying, stop shooting, start living. That's part of the program. It's literally part of the narrative change, community moral norm shifting for the program Safe Streets, is having people wear these shirts. And I know that some of those shirts, I believe, are printed in the city, but the vast majority of them are printed in the county. And something like that is like literally the people you're trying to get off the corner from doing the things that could lead to gun violence. They could be making those shirts. But that becomes the level of precise, concrete, pragmatic victory that gets taken off the table when we live in the world of intellectual abstraction, anti-capitalism, socialism, within a global context, the low-hanging fruit of material interventions to the political process that could yield concrete results for our theories get left outside the frame of centering leftist politics. And even I believe many leftists would be against that. But the fact that they don't center it, the fact that it doesn't create a sense of emotional catharsis, doesn't go viral in a way that it also brings up notions of corrupt local politicians buying off their friends with contracts. And again, something we've talked about repeatedly, the narratives of corruption when it comes to using public money to invest in the black community meeting its needs precludes leftists sometimes from investing in the community-based methods of economic redistribution that people will materially feel. So those are the two things I just wanted to drop before we left today. But again, we thank you. If you feel so inclined, visit lbsbaltimore.com, look at our merchandise, look at our reports, but also if you're able, continue to invest in the monthly dollars we get from donors through our Sustainer program. Keep us able to provide you this information, allows us to fund ourselves independently and be able to not just be subject to produce intellectually for people that have the money to do things like a fee-for-service contract for us. So that's so important to the unrestricted capital. And then we see now with the current political environment, restrictions on grants, limitations on people's ability to fund themselves, being able to invest in an independent black think tank to produce knowledge like this, $10 a month to start, gives us the ability to keep that independence and continue to produce information like this. That's lbsbaltimore.com/sustain. But again, check out all the other information on the site, including lots of things we've written about the Democratic Party of Maryland, things we've written about the concrete victories that we believe show the efficacy of our model of engagement, and also things we've written about third-party politics. There are also lots of conversations about third-party politics on the Black Liberation Media YouTube page, where you have conversations with Andy Ellis, who is running to be the Green Party's nominee for governor in Maryland, on Saturdays with Renee. And I believe Amix, who I like as well, someone who has been in the community not just during election times, but fighting the attempt to shrink the city council that was paid for by the executive director of Sinclair Media, David Smith, who runs his right-wing media org as essentially a attempt to demonize black youth, and in other places, especially outside of Baltimore, support Trump's agenda. They also had an agenda to shrink our city council through ballot initiatives, claiming it was a good governance initiative, and the Green Party was really, Andy, was really helpful in defeating that. So it's not just showing up to run for governor, but continuously investing in community, because part of the argument that we made together with the Green Party was a smaller city council for a city like Baltimore would dilute black political power. So check that out on Black Liberation Media's YouTube. You can also obviously check out the website as well. And again, we always appreciate you all supporting our work, and we will see you next time. Take care.